Hello, freedom loving people, and welcome to another episode of the Restricted Handling Podcast. Today, you've got Glenn and myself. For those who haven't been with us before, do our best to break down what's going on in the world of international security, geopolitics, and inform mainly Americans about some of the things that we think are important, worthy of being on the radar. Glenn, for those who don't know him, spent over 30 years in the US government, most of that in the CIA, working a host of topics, multi time chief of station. Won't let me say that he's an expert on Russia, but he knows Russia very well. I myself spent time in the Army and the CIA, not quite as long as Glenn. I worked a lot of counterterrorism, Western Europe, North Africa. With that, Glenn, we both got back from travels. You look like you got some sun. How was it?
It was wonderful. Let's start up by saying a big international event going on right now, the World Cup of Snooker. No, okay, the World Cup. Just watched the end of the England-Argentina match. Incredible game, last 6 minutes. I know a lot of people out there following, including Americans who have now become hooked on the World Cup, which is great to see. My wife and I were just down in Florida, and we were watching the England-Norway game match at a bar, and there was a kid from Argentina there, and we started chatting him up. Not kid, I mean, he's probably in his 30s, but very nice guy. And we started talking to him, and I said, "Who do you want to win?" And he said, "We want the Norwegians to win. We don't like the English." He said, "Have you ever heard of a place called the Falklands?"
Yeah,
So what's you going on? So I was like, "Okay, I don't want to touch that one." But great game tonight. I mean, really. And now it's to Spain. And you, sir, were just in Spain training the Spanish team to defeat the French. Tell me what did you tell them when you were with them,
I will
Brian?
say it was nice to see the French go down in that one. I have a love hate with the French, but on Bastille Day, that was tough. I am sure for much of France to see them lose on that day. I got to see Switzerland play when I was in Switzerland, the English play when I was in London, the Scots play when I was in Edinburgh, and Spain play when we were in Seville. It was
Wow.
awesome to see how these different teams, or how the fans at least, get up for these games. I mean, and they're all late in the night, like 10 p.m. over in Europe. It's a
Right.
blast, so much fun.
I don't have nearly the depth that you have, but I did get to spend in 2018 when the French won the World Cup. I got to celebrate with the French community at the French embassy in Moscow. It was probably 3,000 French citizens. It was a huge party. It was a lot of fun. We watched the game on big screen TVs, and then they celebrated. My wife and I probably went home at about 2 in the morning. I think the French were still partying the next morning, like at 9 o'clock when we were going to work. So I can't say that I wanted either France or Spain to win. We have friends in both countries, but I think that was a bit of a surprise. Everybody was predicting that France was going to win the World Cup. So, and this has been a strange World Cup, a lot of different surprises.
That was a very diplomatic way of you to say something instead of me saying, go Spain. Glenn, what should we start on? I'm curious. You've got a lot of contacts. You travel back and forth to Ukraine periodically. It's been 2 weeks since we really sat down. What are you hearing from your network or folks about what's going on right now?
Where to start? I mean, the Ukrainians are having success on the battlefield in certain areas. We've talked about that before. Their mid-strike capabilities are causing some problems for the Russian logistics. It's hard to say there's a lot of stuff in the media about how Crimea is going to collapse, how they're cutting off the Crimea from the rest of Russia. The lines of communications are being severed. Some people say that's exaggeration. I don't know. I will be returning there in a couple of weeks for an extended period. It will be a very interesting visit. The deep strikes continue, but of course, on the other end, the Russians are mercilessly hitting targets with their deep strike capabilities in Ukraine. And we know that the Ukrainians are running out of air defense capabilities to contend with the cruise missiles. And so, we didn't have the opportunity to talk big summit in Ankara. We
That's right.
should probably talk about that.
Yep.
President Trump was there. Very warm reception with Turkish President Erdogan. I definitely want to talk about this on the show tonight a little bit because it's very interesting to see the reaction of some people who are aghast that the president was so well received by the Turkish president. I can tell you that the Turks are ecstatic. They loved having President Trump there, and they pretty much big fans of our president. And of course, some big
Let's get into it here, Glenn. Like, why is that? From
why do they
someone
like
who's worked both sides.
why do
Yeah.
they like President Trump? Well,
Yeah, like,
because
w
President Trump has done a very good job of like personalizing the relationship with President Erdogan. You saw the kind of interaction between both of them. He had President Erdogan at the Oval when President Erdogan was here for the UNGA. That was big. The previous administration didn't do that. That really insulted not just President Erdogan, I think, but the Turkish people. And I always say this, Turkey's a very polarized country politically. There's a big opposition, and a lot of the opposition have no love for President Erdogan or his party, but they were very insulted when the US president did not invite President Erdogan to the White House for a meeting. That happened last summer, sorry, summer 24 during the NATO summit in Washington. So that was kind of a slight. President Trump invited President Erdogan to the White House. It was a warm reception, says very nice things about President Erdogan. I thought it was interesting. He got in front of the Turkish military honor guard and he said two words in Turkish, and the Turks just went crazy about that. And of course, I think President Trump's policy towards Turkey is a lot more forward leaning and realistic than maybe previous administrations. He announced while he was there that he wants to bring Turkey back into the F-35 program. Turkey was removed from that over sanctions because they purchased the Russian S-400 missile system. And my understanding is that the Turks now have agreed to sell that system to one of the Gulf countries. And so that has been a bilateral irritant for several years. That seems it's on the way to being resolved. I don't want to speak too soon because if I understand correctly from the Turkish media, the Turkish government has to get approval from Moscow to sell it. So, of course, the Russians will probably throw a monkey wrench into all of this. But while we're talking about President Trump, it wasn't just President Trump. It was the NATO summit in Ankara. So all the NATO leaders were there. Everybody was waiting for a disaster, given the Trump administration's difficult relations with some of our other NATO allies. And I want to stress that because we often hear about how we have a bad relationship with our NATO allies. That's really not true. Some allies right now is very tense. Others are actually pretty better than they were before. Turkey being one of them. And we often forget that Turkey is a major NATO ally with the second largest standing military in NATO, a very robust and growing defense industry. So from my own assessment, I'm sure that President Trump appreciates that. He criticizes the Europeans for not doing enough. He can't really make that criticism on the part of the Turks. The criticism the Turks get a lot is that they're doing stuff without coordinating it with Washington. The Turkish response is, we don't have to coordinate it with Washington. We're not a vassal of the United States. We're not, we're an independent country. But other announcements, President Trump met with President Zelensky. He was at the summit.
on that, there's no guarantee that they would meet, right? Like, that is good that he
Yeah.
took the time to meet with them.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that he would meet. And of course, I think he announced during the meeting that we're going to give the Ukrainians the approval to build Patriot, the actual missiles that, the interceptors that are launched from the launcher. Other good meetings, I think, generally there was no disaster, which I think the Russians were hoping for. And of course, jumping ahead, Lindsey Graham passed away over the, what was it, 2 days ago, yeah?
2 days ago. Yep.
Right? And he had just been in Ukraine. And I read today in the paper that President Trump has said he supports Lindsey Graham's sanctions package, which we've spoken about multiple times on the show. So that's significant because what they're talking about is 100% tariff on countries that buy energy products from Russia. And that would be significant.
It's a lot of pressure on India too, right? I mean, there's the calculations on whether or not to enact that and what that means from a secondary standpoint. Sure, it's not easy, but it is a movement in the right direction.
Right. India, my understanding is PRC, so People's Republic of China, other countries that are still purchasing Russian oil and gas. And I think it's very symbolic too. It just sends a very strong message to Moscow, which in this period we've seen more talk or rumors about deepening economic problems in Russia, frustrations with the Putin regime, problems Putin's having with some of the people around him, growing dissent within the inner circle. It's hard to vet much of that, right?
Yeah.
And then to get back to Ukraine, we have the Ukrainian government being reshuffled. So President Zelensky, the prime minister, stepped down. There's rumors that we know that the ambassador here, who's only been here less than a year, she's going back to Ukraine. She announced for personal reasons, she wants to leave. There's also talk now in the Ukrainian media that she's under investigation on corruption charges. The prime minister was offered the ambassadorship. My understanding is she doesn't really want it. So there's a reshuffling and some power struggle going on in Kiev at a very interesting time.
Any from your take, like an ambassador leaving early like that, implications of corruption, somebody not taking the ambassadorship, anything to read into that? I know it's hard to speculate, but just you've been around it for decades. Anything you would pull away from that?
Well, just my sense that this ambassador was nominated and sent here very quickly. The previous ambassador had been here for quite a bit of time. She had very deep connections here. I think she stayed in the U.S. after she left the ambassadorial post because her family, by the way, wonderful lady, very, very bright lady. And I've met her and her family. Had the honor to sit with them at an honors dinner. She got an award. Her husband is a U.S. citizen, as I recall. Her children are U.S. citizens. So, but there was a lot of moving and shaking. And next thing you know, we had a new ambassador here. I don't know if she ever got her legs under her. I also had the opportunity to meet with her a couple of weeks ago at an event. Very nice, but I don't know that she was cut out for the ambassadorial role. And being an ambassador is a hard job, right? Especially if you're in a key place like Washington, trying to keep up with all the politics and all the demands. The Ukrainians have constant delegations coming here. All the time. So it's a tough job because you have to support all those delegations, as you know, toe the line for your government, and then also just take care of the day-to-day affairs of the embassy.
I've always loved the Ukrainian embassy in DC. It sits right on the edge of Georgetown at the edge of M Street, right by Key Bridge. I just remember that from 25 years ago, going to school there, seeing it. It's been there since, obviously, taken on more meaning for many Americans in the last 10 years, certainly the last four.
My understanding is that building was given to the Ukrainians, or was by the Ukrainian diaspora in the States when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Ooh,
And it's a great location, right? Right on M Street at the edge of by the bridge. Beautiful building. Yeah. So it's, I'd say it's one of the nicer embassies or locations in Washington. I think the nicest may be the French or the German embassies. They're pretty.
those are also in Georgetown, right? But they're kind of tucked away. They're a little farther from the action. They're,
Yes.
quieter.
Yes. For people that don't know, like Massachusetts Avenue is Embassy Row. That's where a lot of the embassies are located, but some are set off in other places.
Possible I may have stumbled past the German and French embassies while going to school there late at night, coming home from bars.
The one thing I will say is people that don't have an embassy in their city, it's nice to have the diplomatic life, but it drives me crazy every time I'm looking for a parking spot and I see one open, I go to pull up and then it says diplomatic parking, like Embassy of Ecuador, Embassy of Cape Verde. And it's like, ah,
Yeah, but you got the benefit from that for many years on the other side,
that
right?
is
Like you got
true.
to park wherever you wanted. Yeah.
I always just wonder what it's like to be a diplomat in Washington, right? It must be
Yeah.
a good life to be because as you know, being a diplomat overseas is a lot of fun. All it comes with its challenges, but one of those benefits was, yes, in many countries I served, you just park where you want to park. So what else is going on in the world? I mean, of course, the war in the Gulf started again. Ceasefire is over. Shooting's happening again.
Blockade is back in
Blockade.
effect. They're now talking about the Houthis in Yemen, kind of on the west side in the Gulf, blocking off Bab al Mandeb as another entry point for shipping, which would kind of create a two-pronged artery blockage for shipping and logistics in the region. So not just Hormuz, but some of the proxy forces over there on the western side of the Gulf.
I think one of the things we're seeing from all this is that people are now very actively looking for alternative routes on a longer term basis because they recognize that this could happen in the future at any time. And it hasn't even been resolved yet.
And actually, I wanted to get your take, Glenn. I'm going to pivot back to Russia, Ukraine just real quick. Drones operated by the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, the Birds unit, targeted 116 vessels in the Sea of Azov over the past 9 days, very much disrupting maritime traffic by the Russians. Could you give people an idea, like how important is that part of geography? And from a resupply, it seems like it's critical, a critical artery. It gets into the Black Sea, basically.
Yeah, I mean, let's look. Historically, the Russians have always been striving for access to warm water ports, right? For trade and to project power outside. Peter the Great built a navy. Catherine the Great expanded, looking for warm water ports. In the beginning, okay, the naval base in the Black Sea at Sevastopol was probably one of the main reasons why there was a huge dissatisfaction with many Russians after 1991, when Crimea stayed with the Ukrainians and Sevastopol naval base was outside of their control. The Russians had control of the base. So let's say it's like one of our bases in the Far East or in Europe. It was under Russian control, but it was on Ukrainian territory. And many Russians started arguing, going back to 1991, 92, we need to take Crimea back so we can control the access to the Black Sea. The Sea of Azov is also a very important line of access. I will say this is a little petty, but most people don't remember this. But in 2018, if I remember correctly, the Russians seized a Ukrainian vessel in the Sea of Azov. They basically kidnapped the crew. They claimed that they were in Russian waters, not international waters, and there was a standoff for several months. They had these Ukrainians in captivity, and I read today that the Ukrainians blew up the Russian vessel that actually seized
Yes,
their sailors. So that's a bit of maybe justice.
I love it.
Yeah, and of course, going back to your main question, Ryan. I mean, economically, it's very important because the Russians have still continued to export grain, wheat, oil through the Black Sea, and the Ukrainians now are increasing their attacks on Russian vessels to hurt the Russian economy. I think one of the Ukrainian ministers said they're focused very much on going after assets that are part of the strategic war effort for Russia, and that's energy resources, oil and gas. And the Ukrainians have been mercilessly going after those targets, including on the water now. Right. Yeah. I mean, the Ukrainians get credit for using naval drones, maritime drones so effectively. My understanding is now the U.S. is using them in the Strait of Hormuz. I saw a video of one hitting a Iranian target, like a pier. There was obviously some kind of Iranian weapon system on the pier, which has been very interesting to see. So the U.S. is quickly adapting. You probably know there's been a lot of resistance in the military and in the defense industry to going to drones. There's always a debate, like unmanned aircraft. You can't do that. You need to have the pilot, especially Apaches. Without the pilot, the Apache won't be effective.
Totally.
You need a smart guy behind what do you call that? Sturmwall. What do you call
Cyclic.
it?
Did you just use a Russian term for it?
Yeah. What do you call it in English? The
Cyclic. A cyclic.
cycling, behind the cycling. Anyway, so yeah, the Ukrainians they are definitely doing a lot of damage to the Russian the lines of communications, logistics.
How about a couple other stories I wanted to get your take on in Russia? Huge front page spread in The Economist of Andrei Melnichenko. I'm sure I got that wrong, but Russian oligarch, very much speaking out against, not hard against Putin, but just in general, warning the West not to get too focused on seeing Russia implode, but also not as supportive of Putin as one might think. And I would imagine this is a really fine line to walk, even for an oligarch. What's your take when something like this happens, Glenn?
I'm always a little hesitant that this is traditional disinformation operation, a little bit of information warfare to scare. When you say that, like disrupt, don't push too far because everything could collapse and you could have a big problem, or a new leader could come along who's worse. He or she may use nuclear weapons. I think there's some of this going on from the Kremlin. They do it traditionally to try and influence decisions being made in Brussels or Washington. I'm sure that people are growing frustrated with Putin. There's no doubt about that. These oligarchs are losing money. And
Yeah,
I've written about this. I've spoken about it publicly. The Russian people should know that their leadership right now is digging a hole deeper and deeper for that country. And for what? Like, what are they going to get out of it? The Ukrainians were not denying them access to Sevastopol or the Black Sea, and neither was NATO. There was no plan to occupy Ukraine by NATO or the Sevastopol naval base. So this was a miscalculation. It was driven, in my opinion, the war by Putin's ego and his confused psychology, I think. And the Russian people are paying a price for it. And so you're beginning to see videos of people complaining. You see the gas lines in Russia,
Right. Yeah.
right? I read an article where Russians are now like selling their children, not selling, they're renting their children out to stand on line for people, these gas lines. Who says Russians can't be entrepreneurial? But
And they're not letting, so the Kremlin is not allowing regional governments to direct some of the fuel to address some of the shortages. They're centralizing decisions in Moscow, which is really upsetting folks on the periphery, which feels like we're harkening back maybe to Soviet times, which probably didn't work so well. And they're feeling the pinch. You got people really frustrated at the gas lines, which we haven't seen quite since 2022 like this.
right. Right. Again, I'm always a little careful because some of this is probably propaganda. Some people are pushing a lot of like these stories into the media.
Also noticed that the Russians are recruiting women now, and I didn't realize that was kind of off limits for so long. So my understanding, their recruitment rate has fallen from about 1,200 people a day, which is insane to me, 1,200 a day just 2 years ago, to around 900. So they're not able to recruit as many. And they've started getting women into particular billets that they could then use for deploying potentially. And I
Right.
was just surprised. I don't know why I just assumed that this was more commonplace in Russia, but dipping into that seems to be a significant departure now.
No, there was a good high level of chauvinist feelings among the Russians. If you see the Ukrainians, many women are fighting. They're on the front lines. They're doing all kinds of stuff. Logically, if you're smart, then you say, okay, a lot of the jobs that can be done, you just need smart people to do them. And there are a lot of smart Russian women, right? A lot of educated. They could do a lot of these jobs. By the way, I have to say, like my experience in Russia, the women actually like they carry a lot of the weight in society there. You
That's
used to
why I'm wondering if this might spark, not spark, but like create a little undertone of frustration, even more so than normal.
possible. Why not? I mean, somebody said this to me recently. The women are the ones that tend to also take to the streets first. They get frustrated first. They don't buy. So the argument was that the male population buys the propaganda a lot quicker and easier than the female population in Russia. I don't know if that's true or not, but I will say that my experience was you'd see a car like on the side of the road with a flat tire. The woman was out changing the tire. Yeah, and maybe that's cultural, but women carry. And by the way, I mean I think part of this is after this Second World War, what the Russians call the Great Patriotic War. So many men were killed. There was a higher ratio of women. They had to work in the factories. They had to take a lot of the jobs that the men had, work in the fields, and so it it does not strike me as odd that they would do this. What's odd is that they didn't do it sooner. But that's the Russian mentality.
Having served in combat with women, I'm also more concerned now that they're going to have women on the front. Potentially, I don't know if they'd get to the front lines, but they are effective. And I'd rather just have some idiots out there handling things still. But we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah. I don't know that. I mean, it's going to take the Russians a lot to reorganize to like accommodate, right?
Oh my
But
gosh, could you imagine?
I always say to people, like in my career in the agency, that probably the best officers I had were females,
Yeah.
incredibly talented. So, I mean, I had a lot of good male officers, but overall, when I close my eyes and think back, like who were the most effective, often they were female officers who were just very, very competent. And we have figured out that that's part of the equation. The Russians still have not figured it out. Maybe they're just figuring it out now out of desperation.
Yeah.
But if I were a Russian woman, I'd also understand that now they're in a crisis. Now they call you up, right? Where
Yeah.
were no one was giving you like uniforms to parade in and medals before that. And this reminds me of a conversation I had with the Russian once where we were talking about, he said, "Oh, how could you make the director of the CIA a woman?" And I said, "Well, why?" She's like, "Incredible. Like, you know her. I work for her. She's like super smart, like great." He said, "Oh, no, no, we would never do that." And I said, in your history of your intelligence services, you had some officers that they died. They gave their lives during the Second World War doing incredibly dangerous work. He said, "Oh, yeah, it's in wartime, like in a crisis." But I said,
So now
whoa.
it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, now it's okay. Anyway,
Separate, very interesting story that came up. New York Times reported Japan as a den of spies. I don't know if you saw this one, Glenn, but
I saw that.
after, so just for listeners who haven't, basically reporting that after 2022, with the special military operation from Russia into Ukraine, many Western governments removed their Russian intel folks who were in their capitals or in their countries. Those folks, some of them have been relocated to Japan, where, according to the article, Japan's kind of World War II history has led it to have pretty lax espionage laws. So these Russians are able to operate a little more freely. They're closer to technology that they can export out more readily for their war effort. But they describe it as this den of spies. Glenn, any take on that from your end?
I mean, if I remember correctly from the article, the main guy was a Aeroflot employee. If you're dumb enough not to think that the Aeroflot staff is working for the intel service, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, so honestly, I think the story's a little exaggerated. Everyone gets like super exaggerated, like excited about this stuff nowadays, and I guess it's espionage. But I would think that I would be paying attention to that a long time ago. And the Japanese, my experience are they're pretty good. The Russians are definitely all over the world using different mechanisms to try and, because my understanding, this unit was going after technology, dual use technology or sanctioned technology. And that's what they did in the Cold War. They stole what they couldn't get.
Yeah, they called it the 20th Directorate, Glenn. That's what I think that was the
The
unit that they were
20th
describing.
directive.
Yeah, 20th.
Yeah. They've been doing this for years. I mean, that's one of their missions, to go out and steal technology or find goods that are sanctioned to defeat sanctions. So, by the way, I just read a very interesting book. I didn't realize that, we talk about like sex spies, like honey traps. The Japanese were some of the original. I read about the Germans were actually the first to create like a brothel where they used it. The intelligence service used it to lure in targets and then get information from them, blackmail them. And then the Japanese learned from the Germans and actually had the German guy that did it come to Tokyo and teach the Japanese. So, very interesting story.
Is this kind of World War II time frame?
No, no, no. This goes back to like, I don't know, the Meiji Empire. It's like
I was gonna
many,
say this has to be as old as time, right?
yes, we could have a whole podcast on that topic. I have some very funny
Yeah, who do
stories.
you bring on for that? Who's the expert?
Yeah, probably you got to be careful there.
Okay, and then one of the things that came out of China in the past week was nuclear submarine conducting a missile launch. Very little warning to neighbors, including the US, but analysts suggesting potentially a show of force, deterrence, like this is what they could do to have a second strike nuclear capability if required. Also part of their gray zone tactics. But probably, I don't know if I would say something to watch, but something interesting that came up that we haven't seen from them before in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Chinese military expert, naval expert. I'm sure that people were watching it. I don't know whether Jap- the Beijing was messaging by doing this, or maybe there's just a lack of like. Sometimes we do things like, I don't know. You know the story of Able Archer exercise in Europe in the 80s when the Reagan administration. We did periodically large scale military exercises in Europe, like for coordination between NATO forces, and the U.S. would deploy troops from the U.S. To augment the troops that we were, with the height of our presence in Europe. I think we had 300,000 U.S. troops serving all across Europe. But we would send units; they would deploy, they'd mobilize and deploy to augment that, and we'd have large scale exercises. Well, there was a period where the KGB decided they saw some of this activity. They thought the U.S. was getting ready to go to war, and the British found out through one of their sources that the KGB was like telling the Politburo, the Americans are getting ready to go to war. And then the Politburo gave the order, okay, we need to like strike first. So this escalation started by mistake. The British, Oleg Gordievsky, who was a British source, told the British, the MI6 told, my understanding is Margaret Thatcher then sent a message, gave the order to send the message to Ronald Reagan through the agency. And when Ronald Reagan found out that like steps were taken to de-escalate, because there was almost a mistake that like this training exercise was misinterpreted. So could that happen? Sure. Sometimes we give our enemies we assume it like ill intent. Maybe it's just stupidity or a mistake.
True. Could be.
I don't think, people, oh, the Chinese are so wise and they think hundreds of years in advance, and humans are humans. They do things, they make mistakes. So, but to this topic, there was also like an article about 10 days ago about how the Russians and the Chinese are coordinating, how they were trying to crack Starlink. They were talking about how to destroy Starlink in the time of a war. And that was definitely something we should pay attention to as well.
The Chinese also were able to recover a rocket that they fired into the atmosphere, I think for the first time, like safely recover it, which is a big deal. Obviously, we hear a lot about SpaceX being able to do that, cuts your costs down dramatically, allows you to move much faster. So when it comes to kind of like the satellite battle that could ensue, their ability to do that independently is a big deal. The other thing I just noticed, and this is why I'll never go to China, I'm curious if you would go there ever, Glenn, but Yulin Chen, who had been detained since 2024, an American citizen, was traveling to China, visiting family, works in the scientific space on seismic data used to analyze underground explosions that could be nuclear as opposed to regular seismic activity associated with earthquakes, has been detained there for 2 years. President Trump has made comments to Xi when they've talked in the past about this, but the family has come out more publicly in the past 2 weeks about this person's detention, feeling diplomacy hasn't worked. But it's just a reminder, this isn't the first case of somebody being detained and not allowed to leave China. Would you ever go back there? Or not, I don't know, go back there, but would you ever go there today, Glenn, with your background?
No.
No, me neither.
I mean, for one thing, I don't like flying that far. So that's a long trip. Second thing, I don't want to be a permanent guest. And, I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things to see in the People's Republic of China, but I have other places I prefer to go. So, by the way, while I have you, I saw Ahmad Shargi. He spoke at the Institute of World Politics last week. So, and I got to meet his sister, who was instrumental in lobbying the U.S. government to get her brother out of Iranian custody. So he asked me to pass on his regards to you and all of our listeners, viewers. I don't know, are they listeners, viewers, maybe both.
Viewers. Yeah, mainly
Viewers.
viewers. They want to
Viewers.
see your beautiful face, Glenn.
Yeah, I've never had that said before. But I think one thing we don't do is we have to do is just say click like if you like. And there's
That's
some
right.
click like.
Subscribe, like,
Subscribe.
turn on your notifications. It'll help the
Right.
show for sure. An important question. Loreen gum that you have tried that has sponsored us.
Uh-huh.
Have you chewed it overseas yet? Did it work as advertised?
Okay, I'm going to say something which is probably not appropriate, but I smoke shisha, hookah. And I was smoking hookah with some guy, and he said, I love hookah, but I hate like my mouth gets dry the next day. I said, yeah, it's like, that's one of the downsides. He's like, I smoke cigars a lot, this guy that I know. And he's like, so literally the day that he said that to me, the package arrived at my house. And that is really good gum. The toothpaste is good and the gum. So yes, I have chewed it overseas. Yes, I would recommend it. It tastes good. It helps with the dry mouth. My understanding is it's good, like healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So highly recommend it.
And folks, this was not a setup.
I think
Glenn
it was.
literally got this, tried it, and I was just going to ask him about it right now. So it's legit.
Wait, let me read my script. No, seriously. And it showed up at my house. Matter of fact, that person that I went to see, they were in Dubai when I went, and I brought him a box of the gum. I said, this is for you since you have the dry mouth from smoking cigars. So now you can enjoy your cigar at night and not worry about the next day.
Where'd you pick up hookah?
Many years ago in
Interesting. Okay.
long story, late at night when one of my very good dear friends, who is now a dear friend, I just met him about 2 a.m. we were still working. And he said, hey, you want to go smoke shisha? So we were working like a lot, and I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we sat under the stars and we smoked shisha, and that's when I got hooked.
That's cool. Very
Yeah,
cool. My friend keeps saying we need to do it, and I have never taken the plunge. So
someday.
maybe I need to. Maybe I need to.
Yes.
All right. What did we miss, Glenn? Anything else on your radar that you're watching?
No, I mean you were in Spain, right? You said Spain and Italy.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, you were saying it's extremely hot, 108 in the south of
108
Spain.
in southern Spain. We went to the coast to get away from the heat. It worked. We got to see Gibraltar. I feel like it's worth going there, seeing the
Cool.
monkeys, and then checking out an English pub, and then getting out of there.
When you were there, is it when President Trump made his comments about, he's very frustrated with the Spanish prime minister, a lot of back and forth, and then he said, "No more trade. I'm going to order the." Was there any response from the Spanish? Were they upset or?
There was none, but that's because I think literally because the World Cup is going on, and they are they're playing every 3 days, and and they're electric. They've only been scored on like once,
Yeah,
so I think that's what everybody cares about. And it was good. So this I will say for folks like having my kids overseas. They've spent time overseas before living there, but they're a little bit older now, and it's been good moving, like just traveling around. Because I think from the US, we believe everybody thinks about what's going on in the US all the time around the world. Honestly, I think they could care less most of the time. Like they're happy you got an American tourist. They want to tell you about what's going on, but they're not living and breathing necessarily all the stuff we might read. I think it's good for the kids to catch that.
that's a good point. Yes, I think sometimes we probably exaggerate our importance. Nobody held it against you. Good.
No,
Listen, I couldn't imagine the Spanish doing that.
no.
Whether we were in a diplomatic row with them about something, I always had very good experience with the Spanish. So
I will say, if there are listeners in Spain who know a company that makes Tinto de Verano, which is now my favorite alcoholic beverage, half red wine, half Sprite, and ice. I am totally up for Glenn and I, you know, marketing that for you
we will
to an
sponsor.
American audience.
Yes,
Bring it
we will.
on over.
Yes, I like it. Tinto, what do you call it? Tinto de?
Tinto de Verano. So it's like Verano is summer. So it's like Tinto, I think, is like a tint of something. It's like the wine of summer, though. It's
I like it.
amazing.
Tinto Verano.
Amazing.
Tinto de Verano. See, so we're ready for all you listeners in Spain. It got to be a couple of you. Prediction for the World Cup?
Ooh, I'm really hoping it's Argentina. I just like Messi a lot. How about you?
I like both teams, but well, we want that Tinto de Verano
All right, that's
sponsorship.
true.
So I got to no. I don't really know. I like both teams. It'll be just fun to watch. I think they're both very, very good teams. But yes, Messi is kind of amazing.
He's just a killer, like the instinct in him. He just comes back and
But he doesn't have that face. He doesn't look like a killer. He
no,
seems like a nice
no,
guy. I
he's
was
an
watching him.
assassin.
It's like this is the kind of guy you want to like live next to.
That's right.
All right, sir. You have a great evening.
You too. Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.